So this is what I'm going to be talking about.
Awesome.
You know, Consul, Terraform Sync, NIA, et cetera, et cetera. It's a lot of stuff. A little bit about me first. So I'm Scott Van Kalken. Everyone calls me SVK. It's a bit easier. You know, I'm pretty privileged. I help run a few meetups, which is nice. I'm super, super passionate about open source, not just software, but data as well. I'm really interested in event-driven architectures, right? And that's both for software, and I have been doing that for a long time, and now for infrastructure, right? Some of the logos down the bottom, I'm sure that you'll know some of those. You know, that's the sort of stuff that's interesting me at the moment. If you can pick the one on the far left, I'll be very surprised. But if anyone can pick that, you know, you get a prize. There is no prize. It's just kudos. You know, let us know if you know what that is. Jamie, you're not allowed to say, because I think you should know. So what is all this, right? So I don't know if you guys noticed, but the world sort of went event-driven while we weren't looking, right? In the software world, it's been event-driven for a very long time, right? Events trigger actions, not the other way around. Software's been there for a while. Now infrastructure is becoming event-driven too. And like I say, the ramifications of this are just massive, right? And they're massive from a code perspective, they're massive from a developer perspective and a pipeline perspective as well, right? So I stole this from the web page of Consul Terraform Sync. You know, it just sort of says, you know, HashiCorp's network infrastructure automation, blah, 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 lets your network admins build stuff that automatically apply network and security infrastructure changes, right? And the key thing there for me, anyway, is that it's reacting to changes in the Consul service catalog, right? And this will make sense as we go through it a bit. And I explained this to one of the guys in the office the other day, and he was sort of scratching his head. And then when I showed him, he went, ah, that's super sexy, right? So it takes about 10 minutes to wrap your head around, right? There's a couple of pieces to the puzzle here. You know, HashiCorp have come out with some really interesting adjuncts to existing products, right? And clicking them together in a way that allows you to move to this event-driven model, right? You know, you've got Consul. I put my hand on my heart. It's an old friend. In terms of NIA, it's acting as a service catalog, right? Which is really cool. Consul Terraform Sync, that's a new friend, and that connects. It's like a little daemon that connects to the Consul service catalog, watches for changes and triggers actions. And that's that sort of event-driven model that I was talking about. And then, you know, we've got a very old friend, Terraform. You know, the actions that get triggered from Consul Terraform Sync, they're called tasks. They are effectively, you're just running Terraform, right? And the Terraform that you run is driven by the Terraform Consul Sync. You actually tell it what to run in a task. And I'll get into that in a sec. So what I'm going to sort of show you in a few minutes is, you know, I like Terraform Cloud, like a couple of people today, makes my life easy. You know, I don't have to worry about too much when I use it. I've pre-deployed some stuff, and I'm just going to show you the app side. So I actually built everything using Terraform Cloud. So I built Consul server, you know, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm just going to sort of talk through deploying my sexy app. And then, you know, that app has a Consul client on it. That's going to register with Consul. Consul Terraform Sync is going to listen for changes, right? And we tell it what to execute as part of an HCL. It's going to execute some Terraform, and it's going to configure my downstream network device. I've only got one task, but you can have multiple tasks. So I've done that as well. And I've done multiple tasks across multiple devices as well. So that's really interesting as well. So effectively, the idea is, right, that you apply changes over on the left. You've got a Consul client embedded in your app. It registers, and then there's other stuff as part of your ecosystem, right, that happens or needs to happen, right? And they ripple out auto-magically to those downstream devices. if you think about that, that is super, super cool. And the reason that it's super, super cool is, you know, you get a bit of separation from a code perspective as a developer. I don't need to worry about that stuff on the right-hand side here. I just need to worry about the stuff in my app, making sure that it registers successfully. And if I see it in Consul, I know that all of this stuff on the right-hand side has been taken care of, right? And that is super sexy for me as a developer. Just, I get on, I want to deploy my application. You know, there's certain things that I don't want to really have to think about too much. And it takes the brittleness of some pipelines that I'm sure we've all seen, right? It takes that away. So if you have a bit of a listen, right? Event-driven architectures like this is where you want to be, right? It lets you push config to downstream devices, reduces your friction as a developer, makes you a bit speedier because, you know, presumably someone somewhere has written a provider and a module to interact with that downstream device, and you can just use it. Even if you're writing a custom one, that's okay too, you know, you can do that, but it's taken care of, and you can just, as a developer, you can consume that, right? And it makes everything repeatable, like, you know, like we're all here to sort of do. You know, you don't have to wait for any changes to be made by anyone else, right? And that's really important when you start dealing with some of these funkier devices out there, right? So, you know, everything's the same every single time. And that's really where you want to be. So on my app side, and I will get to the demo eventually, on the app side, right, it's a really, really simple configuration. It's just really a standard service. It's not very intelligent, right? It's just a web service. The interesting part for what I'm going to show you is the metadata tagging, right? So the module that I'm going to use expects data to be, or expects your service to have metadata, right? And Consul Terraform sync consumes that metadata, and then, you know, we pass that as variables into the module that we've written to configure the downstream device, right? It really is that simple, right? I say that, but it took a little while to get working, right? But it took me about, I reckon when I first came to this, it took me about an hour to get it working, right? Consul Terraform sync has a config as well. Now, if I just skip back, right? So, you know, that app side config, that's sort of this part here, you know, Consul Terraform sync is over here, right? The Consul config is just whatever, right? You know, the client, we presume it can connect. So Consul Terraform sync here has, it's a daemon and it has its own configuration. And this is a standard HCL file. And it's got a few bits in it, right? So it's got a driver, you know, up the top that sort of configures the sub-process and to relay any discovered information to Terraform, right? So, you know, that'll discover the metadata and then it'll push it into Terraform. The Consul server address, that's actually just what I'm sort of checking changes against, right? That's my Consul server. The provider is the provider that I'm going to use to configure my downstream stuff, and that's an existing provider, right? There's a bunch of them. And then tasks, and the tasks are really interesting, right? So the tasks, these tasks are executed when any changes detected in the service that I'm configured to listen for. So if I go back to my diagram, right? So when if I were to spin up 5 of these as an example, that would be a change. If one of these dies, that would be a change, et cetera, et cetera. And those changes would register inside Consul, and then Consul Terraform sync would listen for those changes and be notified of those changes, and then take action based on that task stanza down here, right? And what it's going to do, it's going to use this provider, and it's going to use this module, right? And it's listening for the service named web. And if I go back for a sec to my service config, you can see that my service is actually named web. Thumbs up. You know, I've got that provider there, and I also happen to have this particular module as well, right? So that task again, you know, that task is really getting that metadata, and it's using that metadata as an input into the module, right? And this is just a bit of a look at the underlying module, which is here. It's just a standard Terraform module. You know, there's nothing special here. I'm passing in, I'm sort of parsing some metadata here and then just flicking it on, and the rest of the module sort of compiles a configuration and deploys it, right? But it's really that from a developer perspective, it's the metadata that's important, you know? So without further ado, I'll just walk through what I've got deployed, right? So I've got Consul Terraform sync running as well. I've got Terraform Cloud, which is where I deployed everything from. I've got 10 web servers running with my super sexy app. I have Consul. Each one of these is registered under my service, and my service is really sort of cool because you can see the metadata there on my individual service instance. So, you know, this is the same metadata that my module is going to expect to receive, right? And Consul Terraform Sync is going to grab that metadata and then, you know, push that down to the module as part of the task. And then I've got my bit of network infrastructure here. This is a traditional piece of network infrastructure, right? It's sort of cool, does its job, but it's not something as an application developer that I may have a lot of knowledge about, right? So I just want to be able to interact with that in a really neat way. And I can see there, you know, I've got my 10 things deployed there. Now I can go back to my Terraform Cloud. I'm going to actually spin down 8 of my web servers, right? And this is not rocket science. Just let me kick this off. You know, this is just going to reduce the number of web servers that I've got running. And it's the intention here is really to sort of show you, you know, this is an event that occurs, whether that's an addition or whether that's a removal or whatever. Down the bottom here, I've just got an SSH window that's running, and that's the Consul Terraform Sync log. So what that's going to do, it's like a daemon. It's already running. It's going to query. It's constantly querying Consul for changes. And when a change occurs, like I'm going to destroy a couple of my web servers, you know, that'll be reflected in Consul. They'll time out after their really short health check. They'll become unhealthy. And then at that point, Consul Terraform Sync down here will kick in, and that will start to deploy changes onto my network device. And that's the first one. So we're modifying, you know, we can see if I flick back to my web server service here, you know, I've only got 2 instances left. They're going away. And my Consul Terraform Sync here is, you know, busy applying changes automatically. I don't touch my network infrastructure. I don't need to. I don't need to understand it. I just need to know that when stuff changes in Consul, right, I'm going to have those changes reflected in my application here, right? And you can see there, that's happened. You know, I've destroyed a couple of my things. That's been reflected automatically in my network infrastructure, right? Now, from a, I'll just flick back to this for now. There we are. So from a an application deployment perspective, this means that, you know, deploying the application, really, really easy from an application developer perspective. All I need to do is register it with the appropriate metadata in Consul. Every other change as part of my ecosystem, which may be large, it may be small, whatever, it's triggered by Consul Terraform Sync. It's triggered by my update from my application registering itself here. Everything else is triggered, right? And I've only done one really, really simple use case there, but you know, you can actually do that task. You can do multiple of those. The ramifications of this are actually really, really big, right? The ramifications are that if it's in Consul, then your application is deployed, right? It's just done. And that includes all of the surrounding bits and pieces, right? And that's really important, right? I don't need to have a separate pipeline, or I don't need to have a separate anything to actually deploy those other bits of infrastructure anymore, because Consul Terraform Sync is taking care of the detecting the changes and then deploying to that other infrastructure, right? I only need to tag my service with some metadata. That's very important. As a developer, I don't need to worry about building infrastructure pipelines. That's super very important, right? You know, those infrastructure tasks then become the way to interact repeatedly with my network. That's sort of why we're here, you know. But most importantly for me is it lets you move to an event-driven architecture, and that architecture where all I do is I deploy something, Consul picks it up, and then, you know, changes ripple out throughout my ecosystem. That's the important part to me, right? I don't know what everyone else thinks, but to me, that's super important, right? Is I want my change to ripple out from my service catalog, and I want it to ripple out to everything so that my application is completely deployed. I don't have to do anything else, right? And that ramification and that move to an event-driven architecture, I think we're going to see more and more of that, and it's pretty exciting, right? There's a bunch of links around this to sort of get you started. It's not difficult. I have done it not only with that particular device, I've done it with some other devices. It is pretty cool, right? And it means that, you know, getting up and running is really easy. There's a bunch of modules there, you know, have fun. It is fun. And the way that you interact with your traditional sort of network is going to change, right? So that's really interesting. That's all I've got. Any questions from anyone? You know, get in touch if you want to have a chat. I'm fine to have a chat, and I like beer, so, you know,